Good morning, everyone. I believe I've met many of you, but just in case, my name is Joanne Duclas, and today we're going to be looking at international data exchange. Our guest I'll introduce in a moment is Michael Sessa. For our agenda today, we'll cover off introductions, talk a little bit about, and it's whatever order you prefer, Michael, but EdExchange in the broader context of international data exchange, and we have some discussion questions and next steps. One of my colleagues in a previous session asked for some clarification on what we need from all of you folks. And so I just wanted to start our session today by explaining some of the broader objectives with these sessions. And if there are any additional questions, you could perhaps let me know. The purpose of these spring session series at the highest level is we want to be able to share with you what we've learned is going on both across Canada and internationally. We feel that having that information at your fingertips will be important for you so that we can then have conversation with all of you about business requirements. In the context of these spring sessions, for example, we have one coming up very soon where we want to share at the highest level some of the business requirements we're thinking of. And then we'll have sessions at the Groningen conference where we'll do some deep dives there. And I'm talking with my colleagues at ARUCC to see if we can possibly have sessions, one of our sessions at least, where we can maybe do a virtual tabletop to support the in-person tabletop discussions that are going on. So if I can pull that off for you, I certainly will do so. In addition, we'll be having more business requirements type conversations after the conference, as well as additional sessions. We need your advice, and we also want to give and share with you our findings and our advice as we keep moving forward. And so while these sessions currently are a lot of people from around the world sharing with you, we will be tapping into you more actively to get your input. It's a little difficult to have conversations, though, without all of you having at least an inkling of what's going on beyond our borders, because there's so many opportunities there. Just a question to all of you that are on the line. Does that help to give some clarity in terms of the rationale for these spring sessions and what we hope to be able to do in terms of conversations with you? And maybe you can either show me that through a chat show of hands, or if anybody wants to jump on from an audio point of view and validate, that would be helpful for me. So what do we have, Matt, in terms of on the chat? Are people having additional questions about this?
No additional questions at this time.
Okay. Happy to clarify further and also provide more input. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Michael Sessa. Michael is the Executive Director of the Post-Secondary Electronic Standards Council in the US. It is an international organization in that they have affiliates such as the PESC here in Canada and many working groups. I believe, Michael, you have about 15 working groups working actively on a variety of things. Is that correct?
Give or take one or two, yes.
And Michael has been a wonderful friend to us Canadians. He's guided us, he's guided me personally, and he's provided insights on so many levels with regards to what's been going on internationally and what's happening in the US. And so I invited him here today because I thought it would be so useful for all of you to hear from Michael and learn from him as well. He sits, of course, on the PESC Board of Directors. He's worked in the financial aid industry for years, including, I believe, at a bank, if I'm not mistaken, or a near bank or some kind of financial aid association. Is that correct, Michael?
I started out at a bank, yes.
Yeah.
Way back when.
Yeah. So he is very active internationally, and he's all over the world in terms of his work, and is a good guide to us. Moderating today and helping me is Matt Schultz. That's the gentleman you heard earlier. Matt, can you just say hello?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for your time today, and thanks, Michael.
Yes, and he is going to be moderating the chat and also identifying any questions that all of you have, although you are free to, as I say, jump on and share if you want to put some perspective and context. I am the project consulting lead for the Groningen and Student Mobility Project. It's not the only project I'm working on, but it is an important one, and it's one where we're working nationally. And we also have two projects, one in Ontario and one in BC, which we will be doing additional deep dives on to better understand some of those communities because of the complexity and the number of institutions involved. And so we are working in partnership in Ontario with CRELO and URA, which is the College Ontario Registrarial Group. And in BC, we're working in partnership with the University of Victoria. And so my BC colleagues will be hearing more about this project as we continue to dig in. I am going to say if there's anybody on this call that wants to know more about our national project or the two sub-projects, I can stay on at the end of this session today and do a bit of a Cole's notes on the project. So we'll do a check-in at the end to see if there's anybody that needs that. If not, we'll just close off the session. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and I have a small question for you. Michael, do you want to run your slides, or shall I share them from here? What's your preference?
You can share them from there. I think minimizing any technical potential problem is a good thing.
Okay, so without further ado, let me just pull up your slide deck, and then I will hand it over to you, Michael.
Wonderful. And Joanne, I can just prompt you as we go on. So welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. As Joanne said, my name is Michael Sessa with PESC. I have been with PESC since 1999. I was on the board for several years and then took over in 2002. But Joanne is right. I did start my career back in, I believe, 1990 at the Boston 5-cent Savings Bank, doing student loans and a whole variety of things. And that's really where I got my career started in higher education, was through doing student loans, and then worked my way up the chain, I guess. So today, as Joanne had asked me, to provide some insights, not only on data exchange, but some of the international perspectives. It's gotten more complicated, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. But what that requires is that we all now be vigilant and be data advocates and be inquisitive, because there are so many options that are emerging. And that's why I titled this, The Right Data, the Right Way, the Right Technology, and the Right People. We have to think about those items because while they might be compartmentalized at times, they all synchronize together, and they must synchronize together, or else you will find that at the end of your project, something was missed. So Joanne, on to the next one. Just quickly about PESC, and you can go to PESC.org to find out more information. For those folks that want some brief information, I just put a page together here that says we were founded in 1997. We are a 501c3 nonprofit association. So in the US, 501c3 is a charity on the equivalency of churches and such. We are an open standards development body, which means we help develop standards. We are an open standard setting body, which means we set standards or point to them. And our membership trusts us to do that because of our expertise in data, but also because we don't just point to anything. We are governed by voluntary consensus. What does that mean? Voluntary consensus means that we work through the community. I call it crowd power or crowdsourcing. We work through the community on specific topics, and then we put out either a standard or an initiative, but we have no authority to enforce it. We then put that out, and then we promote it and ask folks to adopt it. So it's voluntary, but it's consensus because we've worked through the community to make sure that what we're doing is needed, has a business case, is justifiable, and then hopefully is adoptable. We are funded by dues, membership dues, by sponsors, and by registrations. That's it. Our PESC approved standards are on the PESC website, free and open. We have a number of them, from the college transcript to the high school transcript to ePortfolio to a common credential to all of financial aid. And they're provided in various types of technologies, whether it be EDI, PDF, XML. Again, before, say in 1990, there was only EDI. In 2000, there was EDI and XML, and then a few years later, there was PDF. We'll talk about that a little bit more, because the technologies might be different, but the data contained in this is the same. Meaning, if you have an EDI transcript, the value of the data inside that EDI transcript should be identical to an XML transcript for the same student. So it's like saying a book can be issued in paperback or hardcover, but the books are identical. They're just packaged differently for different purposes. We are a membership-based association. We have data, software, and technology service providers, schools, districts, colleges, universities, state and provincial systems, local, state, and provincial government offices, professional, commercial, and nonprofit organizations, nonprofit associations and foundations, and we say roughly, Joanne, about 150 volunteers. We are a two-person staff, but we have about 15 committees, and this is where the crowd power comes in, is that we manage all of our volunteers to do the work that PESC needs to be done. So on to the next. Quickly, just to show you how PESC is organized in going back to the right data and the right technology and the right people. How does PESC manage all of that? With our mission is to lead the establishment and adoption of open data standards across the education domain. And so how do we do that is through a combination of work groups, user groups, and task forces. Some are free and open, and some are member-based. The ones on the top in green are all free and open. So the Academic Credential and Experiential Learning Task Force is one that meets and talks about emerging issues with credentialing. The Admissions Work Group for recruitment data, for standardizing recruitment data, is a new one. I'm going to talk about that at the end. We haven't launched that yet. It's coming on June 21st. The Canadian PESC User Group, CanPESC, formed in 2011 as we, consolidated U.S. and Canadian interests and made sure that Canada, which was integral to the formation of PESC, remained integral, and that we are as Canadian as we are U.S. We have the JSON task force, and JSON is JavaScript object notation, a different type of technology that hasn't been provided yet. Nothing in PESC has been provided in JSON technology, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's new. And then our Global Education Code Work Group, which is a directory of educational institutions that you can use as a lookup service. So we form task force and user groups to keep our eyes and ears on what's going on in the community, what's going on around the world. And we don't believe that making that membership-based is going to actually give us the true sense of what's going on. So we have these organizations, which are these initiatives that are free and open to make sure that we're keeping track and we have our fingers on the pulse of what's going on. But then once something starts to firm up, we then bring it into the blue boxes. So the Change Control Board is the board that really governs all of the standards. EdExchange, we're going to talk about in a little bit, is the data exchange initiative. The Education Record User Group is a group that ensures from the business perspective that everything we're doing makes sense from a business sense and not just a technical perspective. Seal of approval is an optional service for organizations that want a special seal from PESC that says they are using and implementing PESC standards in the spirit in which they were developed. The Technical Advisory Board serves as technical expertise to all of our initiatives, and the PESC Board of Directors obviously oversees all of the governance. And that's all PESC membership based, the blue boxes. But what we do then through a combination of open, free, and PESC membership based initiatives is we produce PESC approved standards, which are free and open, free to anybody in the world, open because you can use them. There's no hoop you have to jump through, and they're agnostic and independent one from the other, or interdependent one from the other, which means you can use one and use the next one when you want, but there's no sequential requirement or timeline for when you use them. Again, we're voluntary consensus based. So interoperability, business versus technical. Again, the right data, the right people, the right way. There are so many different ways to slice and dice initiatives in technology these days. This is one way that PESC looks at it as well. The business side versus the technical side. So from the technical side, technically, we promote that organizations should have an IT strategy. What is the strategy for your systems? Obviously, you have to have a budget for your systems. You need to obviously have a corresponding strategy. Where are your systems going? Who are they serving? Business and use cases help tease that out. Why are we doing the things we need to do? Who is it for? Let's document it. That helps feed the IT strategy. Data delivery, timelines, requirements, data exchange. That's very technical because you are trading with someone else that has corresponding restrictions or limitations on their side. Federations and federated identity are very technical, things that PESC promotes. Obviously, PESC approved standards are very technical. Student and learner-centric perspective. This could go on either side. However, it really should have a trail up to your IT strategy. Unique IDs and standardized code sets. Use them as much as possible. We promote this. And use of hubs and spokes. That's all on the technical side. On the business side, folks, it is much more complicated than the technical side. The business side of any technical initiative carries more responsibility. And because we promote that you should have comprehensive management support at all levels, controlled access to the data internally and externally, and security protocols, disaster recovery. I could have kept going with this left side, but I stopped at training. So flexibility and scalability. Formal governance and policy need to be established. Fraud prevention is massive and has massive pockets around the world. Funding. How is your initiatives being funded? How is licensing being handled? What about privacy? We all are very familiar with GDPR. That's not the only game in town. What about quality control measures? Training. I think you can get the sense that the left side of this, the business interoperability, becomes much more complicated. And I bet many of you could add a whole host of additional items on the left-hand side. But this is just to show you that both need to come together. Nope, that's fine, Joanne, you can keep going. Both need to come together in order to have a successful project. Again, I talked about PDF and XML and EDI and a little bit about JSON. This is a snippet of a white paper. It seems to be okay, I think you can read it. But what this shows is how technology has evolved over the years and what the community has been looking for from PESC. So in 1990, EDI was launched, Electronic Data Interchange. It was not launched in just higher education. It was launched cross sectors, so very much in banking, financial services, transportation, retail. Many still use EDI. Many in higher education still use EDI. And it can be used until organizations decide they no longer want to use it. In 1998, 1999, a new technology called XML emerged, Extensible Markup Language. which was not necessarily such a programming language. EDI was a very heavy programming language because back then we had to worry about space, storage. Can you remember that we had to limit things and limit the size of data because we didn't have enough storage? That issue was finally solved, and when XML came along, which was more verbose, could be readable almost by your eyeballs. You could read an XML schema and try to make sense of it, and it could be more verbose, so your tags could actually make sense. You didn't have to look up a code to understand what it meant. It was all explained, and that became very popular. And you can see, starting in 2004, that PESC launched a number of work groups to develop standards. These are also on the PESC website, and you can scroll on the PESC approved standards page and see all of them. We also launched PDF attachment because we know that document imaging is popular, and folks are still exchanging document images. The great thing about PDF, though, is you can embed the data in it. So while we gave the option for folks to exchange the image, we're really looking for folks to not only exchange the image, but embed the data in there as well. So when you import something, the folks in your organization that need the image, they can get the image, but the folks that need the data to process also can get that data. So again, this is the right way. So when you're talking with organizations and they say, yes, we exchange college transcript, which technology? EDI, XML, PDF, soon to come JSON, what version number? So again, to go back to the original first slide, is it's no longer an easy thing to just ask, what are you doing? You need to ask about the right data, the right version, the right way, and the right technology. So on to the next. Okay, on to the fun stuff. So knowing all of that about PESC and how we operate and how we try to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on, here's a quick snapshot of some of the things that I have picked up along my journey in my conferences and travels around the world. I think many are familiar in Australia and New Zealand about an initiative called My Equals, My Equalifications, or My Equals for short. Amazing initiative that Australia and New Zealand and all the universities and colleges came together, similarly to how Canada is looking to do, to present or prepare a portal or service which consolidates a lot of information and can serve as a massive service provider to students, colleges, career centers, parents. It's an amazing initiative. In Canada, we're obviously very familiar with OCAS and UAC in Apply Alberta. Those application centers have been doing the work for years. And I think, Joanne, from the survey you folks did in Canada, there were actually a number of other application centers in Canada. And obviously there are a number of other ones around the world, but I only picked out a handful. In China, there's the Higher Education Student Information and Career Center. Some of you might have heard PESC, another major initiative that created a hub and spoke model. So all the colleges and universities in China reporting to PESC. In Europe, you might have heard of MREX, an Erasmus Without Paper. Data initiatives. In the Netherlands, there's a diploma registry where they collect all the diplomas from the colleges and universities in the Netherlands. In South Africa, there's the South African Qualifications Authority, or SAQA, which again is a portal or a hub that's really governing all the qualifications, so there's a single point of contact for South Africa. In the US, you might be familiar with an organization called the Common Application, which serves a number of colleges and universities around the world. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Credentials, National Student Clearinghouse, and Parchment, which are serving de facto as hubs and spokes, because in the US we don't have a hub and spoke like My Equals or like the Diploma Registry in the Netherlands. We may never have that in the US, but we have service providers that are stepping up and trying to fill that gap. So on to the next one. Okay. And this is where I try to present a slide to help us understand how to break down these initiatives. Are they all the same? The answer is no. Are they all trying to do the same thing? The answer is no. Well, how are you supposed to know? Well, that is why we need to be vigilant and ask the questions and make sure we understand what an initiative is doing, who it's serving, and why it exists. And this is why it also can be teased out through business or use cases. What are you serving? Who are you serving? Why are you serving? And what do you need to do that? So I threw up here a very generic IT stack. I mean, it's very oversimplified, but really demonstrates what I want to demonstrate. So in any typical IT stack, you have your operating system that's doing all of the operating and all the data processing. You have the middleware, where your business intelligence and all your cross-system communications is happening, your database where you store the data, and your applications which run on top of all of this. And your applications could be for internal use for your own staff. They could be external for students, learners, parents, employers. And what we need to understand is not every initiative follows the stack on the left-hand side. What we need to do is understand on the right-hand side, is an initiative serving the top half of the stack, just the external presentation of the data, or is it below that dotted line, which is serving internal processing, delivery, and results? And Joanne, just hit enter once. Okay, so let's look at the Netherlands quickly. In the Netherlands, they have a diploma registry. The ministry collects diplomas from all the colleges and universities in the Netherlands. They don't change them. They don't process them. In the Netherlands, they just want to be the single trusted national hub. And that hub now has access for students, parents, employers, but the ministry serves as the trusted agent. So they are not only the organization where the hub exists, but they are on the hook for being the authenticator, the validator, and the trusted agent. So they're not doing any data processing, and they're not doing any data exchange. And that's one thing we have to be truly clear about is, so when you hear about the Netherlands and the diploma registry, you have to understand it is simply a registry. There's no data exchange. There's no changing the data. It's just a collection of existing diplomas. I threw this last piece in just because I thought it might provoke some conversation is, in my opinion, that's why the Netherlands and the diploma registry is perfect for a solution called blockchain. Because blockchain as well doesn't process data. If you peel back and ask all the right questions about blockchain, blockchain is simply a middleware application that presents data externally to your students, learners, parents, employers, but does not process the data. So that's why we have to understand the difference between what an initiative is doing, what it's trying to achieve, and what it might be ripe for or suitable for. In this instance, blockchain is perfect for the Netherlands. In other instances, blockchain might not be perfect for another initiative.
Michael, I noticed that somebody's flashed a chat question. If we could just interject and double check. Is there a question?
Sure.
in that?
No, there's no question.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. I was
No worries. On to the next.
For some reason, sometimes it goes a little slow on me.
That's okay. Okay. So what else have I, picked up in my travels? To get to the heart of this, and what Joanne really wanted me to talk about was EdExchange and data exchange. In the Netherlands, there is no data exchange. It's collection. In China, it's collection. in Australia and New Zealand, it's collection. What do I mean by that? I don't believe at this point that you can use my equals in Australia to transfer from one university to another. You can't use the diploma registry in the Netherlands to transfer from one institution to another, because that's just data collection. There's no data that has to go from one institution to another and then be consumed by that incoming institution, processed, and then results presented so that the student can then integrate and matriculate into that new institution. So globally, there are no data exchange solutions, or any ones that you hear about are completely insufficient. So, you know, I could end it right there and say, there is nothing that exists right now. I don't know of anything that exists on a global scale. And if anybody does, I would love to hear about it. We started this investigation back in 2011 when we formed what's called the Common Data Services Task Force, which we have now retired because after a year or two of analysis and investigation and a gap analysis specifically by California decided that with everything in mind from a common data services perspective, the biggest hole is data exchange. So let's focus on data exchange. And so launched the EdExchange user group, which therefore replaced the Common Data Services Task Force. So you don't hear us talk about the Common Data Services Task Force because it evolved and morphed into EdExchange. Well, what did California find and why did this become so popular? Is there is no consistent way to request and exchange documents between academic institutions. Service provider exchange networks operate in isolation from one another. I think that's just the nature of the beast. So if you work with one service provider, whether it's the Clearinghouse or Parchment, or in Canada, whether you're working with WES or whomever, you really can only communicate with the other customers of that service provider. Well, what if you have a need to talk to another organization that has another service provider? Well, unfortunately, it's a silo. And right now, we live in a world of silos. Available Legacy Exchange was built on legacy technology, storage of personally identifiable information, and lacks confirmation of delivery. So really, I'm just reinforcing that data exchange has really never been attended to. So on to the next one, Joanne.
I just have a question about that, if I may, Michael.
Surely.
A clarifying question. And this is, maybe my colleagues are thinking this. Your point about silos is there could be data exchange between an institution and, let's say, the Ontario University Application Center or Apply Alberta, who then sends it to institution B, but in the same jurisdiction. And that's what you mean by it's a closed system. Is that correct?
What I meant by closed system is meaning is now in Canada, I think you've done tremendous work. So, you know, OCAS and UAC are already connected, but the issue is, so you have the province covered. Not everybody has that. So if you want to communicate in Ontario, you have to go through, you know, OCAS or UAC, and that's beautiful. What do you do if you don't have an OCAS or an UAC? You then have to connect directly with the institution. But if that institution you want to connect to uses another service provider or another SIS, you can build it, but then that's specific for that one connection. It's not reusable. What if the next day you need to send a transcript to another organization that uses a different SIS and isn't in Ontario? You're then going to figure out what they do and then build that connection.
Right.
Because we live in silos.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I hear where you're coming from then. Thank you. Sorry for it.
No worries.
So it seems I have to click this 3 times.
So the EdExchange solution, what were the guiding principles? Enable real-time open data exchange among academic institutions and their service providers, and also service provider to service provider. payload agnostic to support a multitude of documents and types of exchanges. By payload agnostic, we mean it's neutral. It is, for lack of a better word, the FedEx. FedEx doesn't care, or UPS, or whomever you use. They don't care what you put in the envelope. It could be a piece of paper, it could be a piece of cardboard, it could be an item. What FedEx says is, as long as it meets these requirements, we're going to deliver it from point A to point B. That's how PESC looks at it. Is we're not transcript heavy. This isn't for transcripts. This isn't for financial aid. This is for whatever exchange need you might have, because documents, it is not document based, it's document enabled. Tell us what type of document you want to send and you can use it. Community-based solution, again, crowdsourced, crowd power, based on standards and open source. Furthering a little bit about that is open web services architecture with open source code and open standards. A little bit more technical, it's a neutral digital lookup service and a neutral platform. We call it either platform as a service, or you could call it APaaS, application platform as a service. Some of you might have heard of, SaaS, software as a service. Now the latest things are platform as a service, and that's exactly what EdExchange is. It's a neutral platform that you can use almost as part of your internal, you use it as you need it. And there are no other, it is interdependent from anything else you might want to use. The value is it's peer-to-peer network enabled. And that provides secure, reliable, and direct connections between users. And I'm going to explain this a little bit more. But this is vital, especially in today's world, where we know, in speaking with a number of folks through the Canadian PESC user group, the importance of this peer-to-peer. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So we avoid store and forward and file-based technologies. Okay. So EdExchange is a directory server. You could look at it that way. So there's a central server of validated network endpoints. It functions and accepts delivery requests and returns them. It's Java server. It's operated by PESC. So it's a directory as you think a directory is in the middle. And the way it would work is when you want to join EdExchange, you'd go into the directory and you'd create your profile and update it with all the options you want and all the technical stuff that you will do. On the PESC website, we have what's called an onboarding document that takes you step by step, but I wanted to keep this a little bit high level to talk about the functionality of the service, not how do you create a profile. That gets very detailed. And we can have another session on that, Joanne, but this I wanted to keep somewhat high level. So there's a directory server. It keeps your profiles. It is the traffic cop. It is the coordinator of EdExchange. So on to the next one.
Just a quick clarifying question for those who are not more technically oriented on the call, Michael. I sort of describe this kind of as an advanced phone book in the
Sure.
sense, yeah, where you can actually go and say, what does Education Planner do by way of Education Exchange, and what kind of language do they speak in, and what version are they on, et cetera. Oh, great. Okay, so now I can reach out to them and say hello and get my data.
Exactly, and I like that analogy because it also follows through. Is that the phone book doesn't call your person, right? You then have to call peer-to-peer to your phone, through your phone. It's exactly how EdExchange works. Now, if you want to use EdExchange, you have to stand up what's called a network server. It's less complicated than PESC setting up the directory server, but the network server, I don't want to oversimplify and say it's easy, but it's easier than you might expect. It serves as the endpoint in the EdExchange network. It functions for lookup, send, receive. Again, it's Java, and it's local. So you would need to set up this network server. If you think about the hub and the spoke The directory server sits in the middle, and the network server is the spoke. So you could set up a spoke and be the network server in your organization or your institution, and that would connect to the PESC directory server in the middle. On to the next one. Okay. How do I send and you can stay right here, Joanne, that's fine. How do you send a transcript? How does it work? College A calls the EdExchange directory. Now, we can create a hub and spoke with this. So on the right-hand side, you see the EdExchange server host up top, and you see the arrow coming into it. Imagine a whole host of arrows coming into it. That's how it would be the hub. So College A calls the EdExchange directory. You're trying to look up something. You're trying to find out information on how to send something. On to the next one. The directory server responds with everything you asked for. Who has validated network servers? Who can you communicate electronically? And then you can also look up and see what's their technical capacity. What do they offer? What version? So on and so forth. And then on to the next one. Awesome. So now that the EdExchange Hub has responded to you with some information in your college or in your service provider organization, now you're ready to send whatever data you want, whether it be a transcript or whatever. You then connect, or in Joanne's example, call that organization directly. And it appears in an EdExchange envelope because that other provider also has a network server. So therefore, that's how the trust is extended in the EdExchange Federation. But the important thing to note about this is the EdExchange Hub does not host any student data. It does not host Social Security numbers, addresses, any PII whatsoever. In Joanne's example, it is simply the smart phone book. And this is how we avoid file-based directories. This is how we, for lack of a better word, avoid privacy. In any type of privacy or privacy as it relates to PII, because EdExchange and PESC aren't collecting it. We don't want to collect it. We also know that in Canada, one of the biggest issues with, say, the EDI server or the Speedy server, so the Speedy server, which can be used for EDI and XML. So even though you can use the Speedy server for XML, part of the issue with the Speedy server is it functions as a store and forward. So as a hub, it actually stores the PII. So the Speedy server, which resides in the United States, for many that causes a large problem because Canadian data cannot exist on US soil unless it's under, contract and so on and so forth. But that is the general operating procedure. No one can have their data living on another country's soil. And so while the EDI or Speedy server will continue to be used, it might end up just being used for US purposes. But EdExchange can supplement or complement that because it doesn't store PII, and it also can exchange EDI and XML. So on to the next one, Joanne. Okay, so I talked about avoiding file-based technologies between sender and receiver. Reliable because it assures confirmation of delivery. Fast peer-to-peer architecture provides for you to make your business as fast as you want it to be. How you connect to your exchange partner is up to you. And payload agnostic, supporting a variety of document types and transactions. I want to reemphasize too, one of the benefits is delivery. In technology, you cannot just, or even in real life, you cannot just send an email and assume the person got it, the person processed it, or that what you wanted to be done was done. So as a sender of an email, I never lose responsibility for both sides of that communication. I am the sender of an email, but I also have to make sure my receiver receives it, understands it, and then does whatever is needed. So where does the responsibility of communication lie? To both the sender and the receiver. Where does the responsibility of data exchange live? With both, equally between the sender and the receiver. You can't just assume you've sent data and never worry about it again. You have to make sure it was received, and that's why PESC has a number of standards that talk about acknowledgement. They're simple messages. We're acknowledging we received your file. We haven't processed it yet, but we got it. We also have another file where once it's processed and everything's done, it's a thank you, goodbye file. Like when you have a conversation. Hello, who's on the phone? You communicate back and forth. Thank you, the call has ended, goodbye. It's the same thing with the data exchange communication. You need to have an iterative back and forth. So that's one of the hugest benefits of EdExchange. Other ones are obviously improves data integrity and quality, decreases programming costs, reduces human resource costs, and it solves a problem for, at least for PESC and for North America and hopefully the rest of the world, in that there's no other corresponding exchange service in the world. On to the next. So what are the next steps for PESC? We've been working on this for possibly 4 years. So you can think that the source code had to be developed. It was developed by California community colleges. They developed all the source code. They have run the directory server up until last year. So California for 4 years was carrying EdExchange for PESC because they were so interested in it, they wanted to see it move. Now that it has picked up speed and momentum, as of now, PESC operates the directory server. So we've made that transition from California to PESC. So the EdExchange directory server is now under the aegis of PESC. It's up, it's running, and we are finalizing pilots with Credential Solutions, California, Student Clearinghouse, and Parchment. What does that mean? It means we were testing, we were kicking the tires. Does this thing work? So we actually were able to send data back and forth through EdExchange. Now we're at the step, okay, it works. Now we need to cross the T's and dot the I's. So all the 4 pilots are signing a memorandum of understanding with PESC, all the legal information, so a contract. You are going to use EdExchange with PESC. This is what this means. This is what you're liable for. This is what we're liable for. And we're in the process of finalizing that by the end of June. So we'll have those signed by the end of June. We're confirming the insurance. In other words, I've gone through the insurance up and down, making sure we have what we need, but it never falls off the plate. Just like the MOU will remain a living document. If something changes in the business, in the world, we need to make sure that it's reflected in the MOU. We need to make sure it's reflected in the insurance to make sure that we're operating a good, sound service. We're also looking at a budget, and a budget is the internal budget for PESC. So right now, PESC has seeded about $15,000 in project funding for EdExchange, but the 4 pilots have now agreed that they will help out with the budget. So they're going to kick in some seed funding starting July 1st. Very important because folks don't want to give good money after bad money. Well, we've invested good money, it's proving out, and now the 4 pilots are saying, we'll help kick in. Subscription pricing. While PESC would love to offer everything free and open to the world, we would not be able to function. We don't have any grants. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. Obviously, if you have grants, you have funding, you have ability to do stuff, but at the same time, you have a new master. Your grant provider needs to see certain things done and done and proceeded and succeeded and included. PESC has the freedom now to do what's right. That's not saying that grant providers don't want to do what's right, but we would love some grant funding. However, it has to be the right grant funding. So until then, we are including a baseline subscription price. And so that what that means is there would be an annual setup fee, setup and implementation fee for new users, and then an annual renewal fee. We're going to keep it small. We understand that pricing needs to be sensitive. And again, PESC is not looking to take over the world. We're looking to just cover the costs. So the more subscribers we have, the better the pricing will be. I don't have any numbers on pricing, Joanne, but you can base it on, to give you some ballpark. If I said there's been a $15,000 investment, and for next year, for July 1st, we're looking at a $25,000 budget, to cover our costs. We're not looking, so basically, a subscription fee is not going to be $25,000. That's our budget. It'll be small, it'll be nominal, and it'll probably be tiered based on whether you are an institution or, an educational institution, or whether you're a big service provider. Similar to how the PESC membership is tiered. So if you're an institution, you pay a smaller fee. If you're a vendor or service provider, you pay a higher fee. And we're looking at a soft launch in the fall of 2018. And by soft launch is, once we get the MOU in place, once we have the budget and the pricing, how do we then take this to the next step? We're having discussions about, should we just make it available to PESC members? Is that counterproductive? And therefore you need to open it up to the general public. So all good stuff is happening. I'm really excited. But again, we have sort of done this very quietly and a little bit under the radar screen so that it is good, it is valuable, but it is reliable. Some other stuff that you might be interested in, I mentioned the admissions work group for standardizing recruitment data. We're launching that on June 21st. I can provide more information about that. PESC's Global Education Organization Code is another major initiative. PESC and folks in Canada are very heavily involved in that, but you can look at the PESC website. The Jason Task Force is looking at the next level of technology. Folks like Jason. So we are now adding a new technology. So you'll have EDI, you'll have XML, you'll have PDF, and you'll have JSON. So choose your flavor. The key thing, though, is the value of the data across the technologies must be 100% equal regardless. Our technology task force we're launching in the fall at our fall summit. And the technology task force is going to look at providing education about the new emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, blockchain. Again, understanding that blockchain doesn't have a data processing component. Artificial intelligence can be used in a variety of different ways. So what we're trying to do is not only pull in these new technologies, but help educate everybody on the overwhelming, flow of new technologies, but helping you categorize them. What does this one do? Oh, it doesn't do data processing. It helps you present the data. Oh, this one is for verifying the data. Okay, so that we can be more helpful, but also understand what the role of artificial intelligence is going to be in the future and understand how blockchain will impact higher education. So our summit in October 17th through the 19th in San Francisco. We've already confirmed Charmaine as our keynote speaker. And it's going to focus on software information systems, so Ellucian, Workday, Oracle, and PeopleSoft. Major PESC members, major players around the world. We are now going to showcase what they're doing. What's their vision for cloud services, for blockchain, for artificial intelligence? Application centers as well. I mentioned UAC and OCAS. We have the Common App, but there are a number of application centers that are also doing the same types of things, looking at the future. And what we want to do is we believe there's a lot of power in the SISs and the application centers. And in this summit, it's not going to be the only focus, but we're going to showcase them. So, Joanne, I finished up a few minutes early.
Yes. Thank you, Michael.
So, however you want to go from here.
Yeah, I'm noting that we have 5 minutes left. What I have a question, but so as not to preempt the audience, is there anybody in the audience that has a particular clarifying question or another type of question you'd like to ask Michael? Matt, is there anything coming through?
Not currently in the chat box, no.
Okay.
Nope. And Joanne, I know you mentioned you're recording this as well, right?
That's right. Yeah. The question I had is, you know how National Student Clearinghouse has a new NSC Connect, and they're trying to make connections with other organizations around the world. Are they using the and others are Parchment has got pilots, etc. In order to facilitate this, are they using the EdExchange? Are you there, Michael?
Yes, I am. I was listening. No, they are not using EdExchange right now because it is not what we call in production.
Okay, I see. Okay. But
we're looking at the soft launch or production in the fall.
Okay. And so when we look at a potential solution for the future, the EdExchange would be a tremendous complement to all of that.
We hope so.
Okay.
We truly hope so. I mean, we've been, involving folks from Canada, and they were the first ones that tipped us off years ago, before anybody even worried about store and forward. So the EDI server, or the Speedy server, which does store and forward, caused a lot of heartburn early on. So, with input from the Canadians from the start, we're hoping that Canadian interest turns into Canadian usage.
Yeah, and I see this system as an enabler in an array of things that need to be considered for Canada. And
yes.
So that's why I felt it was really important.
I felt it's really important too, but again, go back to the name of the presentation, the right data, the right technology, the right way to the right people. EdExchange is just a slice of the pie, a very important slice, but it was the highest priority that we saw because nothing exists. Standards are being developed under PESC. So how are we finding the right data? We have a process for that. We have a standards development process. We don't have a data exchange process. So while data exchange might be a smaller part of the, ARUCC GDN project, it's still a major part of it. You have to have some type of data exchange in your project. Is it the biggest piece of it? No. Is it one of the important pieces? Yes.
Right. And the other thing that I wanted to be clear to my colleagues on the line is that we have, Michael has emphasized a couple of key points that I think are really critical. The first is that notion of an array of things that will be needed, EdExchange Plus, for example, in order to make those connections. The other thing he talked about was open source. And so as part of the requirements, what open source means is you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you have vendor lockdown. I don't care whether it's blockchain, hub and spoke, data repository, or whatever, you'll need maximum flexibility as you go forward. And the third theme that I heard from what you said, Michael, was the whole notion of interoperability. And that's about, regardless, I mean, in my mind, there's so many levels to that, but regardless of the kind of way you might be exchanging data locally, we need to be mindful in a national solution that crosswalking is important and the capacity to do so. Is that fair to say, Michael?
I think so. Crosswalking is going to become more and more present. And crosswalking data means if you have one organization or one institution using XML and they want to communicate with another organization that's using EDI, we have crosswalks so you can map the data. As we launch JSON and as other technologies come down the road, I think it's improbable to think that every institution is going to be at the same technical capacity. What does that mean? That means one institution might be on XML, one might be on EDI, one might be on XML high school transcript version 6, one might be on version 5. So as the flavors of interoperability sort of expand, so you have options in interoperability, that doesn't mean that it's going to be at this point in time, because we're still at the foot of the bell curve. You might have to crosswalk data. In fact, it's become more and more prevalent over the years. And some of our service providers say that's become their skill course, their core competency or their core skill,
Right.
is mapping data.
Right.
And that's highly important. But the most important thing about data is you can't lose data integrity. You can't lose the value of the data. The student name has to be the student name.
Yes.
Regardless of whether it's an EDI or XML.
Yes, and so that's the other thing that my colleagues will want to know is that whatever we explore for Canada, we're not looking to standardize the content of what the student is sharing. It's just rather making sure the highways are connected and make sense. Michael, I really want to thank you for taking the time today. We are at 1 or 2, so I wanted to just mention to everybody that we do have some additional sessions coming up. So we have one on Thursday, which will not be taped, and that is about the Australia My Equals, as well as the typology of models. You heard today Michael use phrasing like data repositories and hub and spoke and so on, and he did blockchain, and he did a wonderful job. We will be following up to further familiarize yourself, all of you, with these different options, and that'll be on the 7th. As a reminder, that session is not taped. We have our colleagues coming and delivering it all the way from Australia, so my apologies in advance for the lateness of the hour. We do have our first session on exploring business requirements on the 14th. I am going to be booking more. You heard Michael talk about MREX as well as Erasmus Without Borders, which is a fascinating study abroad model. It's fully integrated. I'm in the process of booking those sessions, which will likely begin starting the last week of June, possibly into July. And we will be happy to hold additional sessions, and I know Michael's kindly said he'd be willing to come back as well. Michael, I can't thank you enough for your help today.
Anytime, Joanne, anytime.
Thank you, everyone. And I am going to stay on the line for about 5-10 minutes so that if there's anybody that has questions about the project, the ARUCC Groningen project, I'm happy to do a Coles Notes walkthrough. I don't want to hold other folks up, including Michael. Thank you again, Michael, and I know I'll be in touch with you, I'm sure, very soon.
Thank you all.